It's not common for someone to become a legend of a specific genre of literature so quickly. But when you write and get published one of the best Gothic novels I've ever read, and that's your debut novel, and then about 6 months later you get published another incredible feat of Gothic literature in the form of an amazing short story collection that focuses on the body and all of its magic and all of its horrors and all of its disgustingness, you become a legend. Heather Parry is a legend of Gothic literature, and she's become one in the space of about 6 months, at least from readers' perspectives. Obviously, Heather has been writing for a long time and has done incredible things outside of her own writing, but from the eyes of readers browsing libraries and bookshops, we now have a legend of modern Gothic literature. One debut novel, Orpheus Builds a Girl, which is honestly one of my favourite novels ever, and now a masterpiece of a short story collection. This is my body given for you. This collection was published by Haunt, who are a Scotland-based independent publisher. They are absolutely wonderful. Give them your love, show them your support, pick this book up. They deserve it, Heather deserves it, and here's why. This Is My Body Given For You is a collection of 15 short stories, and it's only about 150 pages long, so every story averages at about 10 pages. It hits hard, it hits quickly, and then it's done, and you are left battered and bruised with your teeth on the floor. In a good way, somehow. The 15 stories in here are very loosely bound into thematic sections. For example, later on in the book, there are 3 stories that have been put together because they're all love stories in some way, or stories that could loosely be connected to the concept of love in some way. Before that, there are 3 stories that are all called tragedies, and so they're all put together. And all of these sections get little introductions. These introductions feel kind of cheeky and fun. They feel as though the narrator is a person in and of themselves. 3 stories deal with rebirth. 1 is a quest, 1 is a story of vengeance, 1 is a comedy. And as I said, these little section introductions are fun. The one for the comedy says, "Fifth, a comedy, which is offered as a mere relief, for we all must have relief, yet the more eagle-eyed reader may discern within it still a hidden bias towards the thesis of this book, being that the limits of the human physical experience are not in fact impermeable." There's an assuredness there. An assuredness in the ethics and morals and themes of the book, but also in what Parry has created, in its own voice. I think it takes a lot of guts to write little intros like that, and she really pulls it off. Now, as I said, all of these stories are about the body in some way. It is grotesque. It is thematically horror and gothic fueled, but Heather Parry, as she said many times, including in an interview with me on my channel, is obsessed with the body. She's told stories about her own body, her own childhood, and her fascination with things like illness and change and growth, and the way that we are brains and tubes inside of a big meat sack full of blood. These stories all explore that, sometimes in an almost funny and tongue-in-cheek way, most of the time in a really shocking and disturbing way. And some of these stories, trigger warning, are about sexual abuse, are about physical harm, are about sickness. They can be really, really tough to read. Tonally, things jump around quite a lot, and that keeps things fun and fluid. And the shortness, the brevity of these stories really helps with that as well. But you're getting a lot here in terms of your emotions. You will go on a roller coaster of feelings. In fact, 2 or 3. You think the ride is over and it's really not. For example, the very first story in here is about a young girl who gets her period for the first time. But her period comes out of her eyes as bloody tears. Her mum wants to take her to the doctor, says that there's something wrong with her. Her dad, who is awkwardly and dangerously religious, believes that this is some kind of a miracle. Every 28 days, for a set time, she bleeds blood from her eyes. That's one way to kick off a book. An early story that really stuck with me is called The Small Island, and it tells the story of 2 islands off the coast of some mainland. Both islands are facing a famine and disease, and things are really bad. The people from the big island hop in a boat and decide to check out the small island. A little girl on that boat says, "I'll go off on shore and I'll have a look around," so she does. She walks around and reports back to the boat, shouting from the beach, "People here have died of some kind of a disease. There are bodies everywhere." And they say, "Oh, well, you can't get back on the boat because you'll bring the disease with you." So she stays on the island. She's starving. she's alone. And I'm going to spoil this one just to give you a kind of taste of what to expect in this collection. But when she reaches breaking point, she decides to peel off a few pieces of flesh from the human bodies that are there, cook them, and eat them. And what she finds is that she gets stronger. But she gets stronger in the parts of her body that she eats. She eats the flesh of an arm, and she develops bulging muscles. Towards the end of the story, she swallows a severed penis whole, and she grows a penis out of the front of her crotch. This is a really twisted and gnarly story about bodies, as they all are. But this one is about transformation. It's about cannibalism, which is a terrifying taboo in its own right, and so many horror stories are based off of it. But then it's also about transformation. The protagonist being a teenage girl is particularly important. This is a moment of puberty, and she's taken to cannibalism as a way for her puberty to be the kind of growth that would frighten anyone. It's almost difficult to try and talk about it. It's a really, really gnarly tale. Perhaps the most frightening story in this, at least for me, because it's a tragedy as much as it is horror, is the story Coup. Coup begins with a weird concept. People who get pregnant have to take precautions by wearing special guards and shields around their crotches and their bellies as they grow, things to protect the baby from some sort of outside danger, outside force. They're wearing armor around their pregnant area. And you find out very quickly that this is because there is some sort of monster that prowls the land, searching for pregnant people and attacking them. And we find out the legend of where this creature came from pretty quickly, and it's really twisted and gnarly. This is a monster story, but you also end up feeling for the monster. Very Frankenstein. The titular story, This Is My Body Given For You, takes place at the very end of the collection. It's the penultimate story, and it tells the story of a group of girls who are kind of imprisoned at this boarding house run by a bunch of really, really cruel monks. A new girl named Lily comes along. Lily teaches the other girls how to do things like make bread, and she cleans and she does all the chores, and she is assaulted sexually by the monks. And this story is a tale of vengeance. But to get to the vengeance, you have to go through a lot of really horrific stuff. Really horrific stuff, so you've been warned. This is a collection of tales that tackle the body in very, very experimental ways that you just wouldn't expect. Heather Parry has a true fascination with the human body, and so what she does with her imagination is examine the ways in which the body could behave, might behave. What is most frightening about our bodies? What is outside of our control? How can we use our bodies as tools and weapons? How do our bodies betray us? What monstrous things could happen to our bodies? It's very John Carpenter at times. It's very David Cronenberg, but it's also uniquely Heather Parry. This is gothic, this is horror, this is gross body stuff. There is nothing quite like it. Heather Parry, as I've said, is a legend of gothic literature, and this book deserves your attention if you love body stuff, body horror, as I do. It's a dream, but a really, really horrible one. A nightmare. I loved it. Heather Parry's done it again. What's next? Well, let's find out. Get this and subscribe for books.